Generational wars are an enormous amount of fun if it is not your generation who's being sledged, which is why I can't get enough of the millennial Gen Z fight. But sometimes these silly scraps about arbitrary social groupings of birthdays are profound.
Can you summarise that fight? Do you think it's just like Gen Z trolling millennials about being old?
Yes. So because now that millennials are, in their 30s and early 40s and so on, they are now the old people in inverted commas, and obviously Gen Zs are the young people. And young people like to sledge old people, and when you're first in the old people category, in inverted commas, it is profoundly uncomfortable to have that shifting realization that you are not the young people anymore.
Meanwhile, Gen Xers have just become irrelevant and or cute.
But you were always kind of irrelevant.
I disagree. True. I think we have only become cooler, Mia. We are cool, but we are not in this particular fight.
They see us as cute, that condescending phase where it's like,
they do.
Oh, Gen Xers, you're so cute.
And kind of bumbling and pathetic.
Amelia said that to us the other day.
She did, actually. That was good. We should get to that. But this essay that we're going to talk about today is not silly. It's profound. And I think there's a lot of truth in it for all of us. It's written by an American content creator. She would hate that tag, Liz Plank. It's called Millennials Were the Last Generation to Have It All. And before we test some of these theories on Amelia, I want to read you a couple of highlights from this essay because it's really good. And it's kind of the main argument about being Gen Y and young was the greatest gift, right? For example, social media. Liz writes, millennials were the last generation to experience social media when it was fun, before it turned into a full-time job. Social media was essentially one big group chat, just a place for your friends and family to keep up with you. The virtual world was not more important than the real one. We went out, drank vodka sodas, made mistakes, and those mistakes stayed in the bar bathroom. You could have a bad night without it showing up in someone's group chat 5 seconds later. Yes.
Yes.
Life was not a personal brand, and being young wasn't a content strategy. It was excessive, earnest, ridiculous, and free. And Gen Z hates us for it because they know they missed out. What do you think about that?
So you'll notice that I bought the side part energy here today.
You really did, and you're rocking it.
Because I'm reclaiming it. And I want to point out to Gen Z, Gen Alpha is coming up behind you, and soon they're going to be making fun of your tube socks and your center parts, and you're going to see what it feels like. But look, I think this is very profound in the sense that millennials were the last of maybe the good ones, but also the first of the bad ones. And I think that's maybe what Liz Plank is missing a little bit here. So yes, we know what life was like before the internet, but life was no walk in the park for us millennials. Get out your violins here. I need to explain that for us, we saw a stable, prosperous world in the 90s, but then that bubble was burst when we basically finished high school around the time of 9/11. Mm-hmm. And that showed that all the things that we took for granted, that skyscrapers would always be there and that the West was largely unencumbered by problems in the rest of the world, that was not true. And then
How old were you during 9/11?
I was 18. So it was really a coming of age. Yeah. And in fact, it happened the day before I started university. And so it's all about me. And then the second thing was that we graduated into the financial crisis. So a lot of people I know took time off before, if they went to graduate school, they wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, they took time off because there was just no jobs to be had. And so they worked sort of jobs that they wouldn't have chosen otherwise because it was such a hostile job market. So basically we've had a huge shock every 7, 8, 9 years since we became adults. And then you've got Brexit and Trump in about 7 or 8 years after the financial crisis. And that was a big sort of blinkers lifting moment for millennials because we are a very progressive generation. Most of us did not want Brexit. Most of us did not want Donald Trump. And that was another big shock. So I think you got these 3 seismic events for our generation that are maybe not fully incorporated into her
The thing that's
idea.
really interesting about generational argy-bargy is that all of the things that you just discussed happen to everybody, right? As in, it's like the things that happen when you're young, tipping into adulthood are very formative, it's true. But everyone else at this table experienced all those events.
Yeah.
The financial crisis,
That's true.
9/11, all of those things. It's really interesting what we think about who owns what time.
That's fascinating because as you were saying that, I was forcing myself to not interrupt and go, did you have AIDS? Because when we were becoming sexually active, suddenly there was this sex-borne virus that could kill you. And even though the boomers also experienced that, they weren't first starting to have sex. So it was much more impactful on Gen X than it was on boomers, even though we were all having sex.
Yeah, I guess every generation can point to these big seismic traumatic events. I think the difference for millennials is that we saw it both ways. So we saw the Blockbuster and the Netflix. We saw the radio and the Spotify of it all. So take the internet,
You're like a bridging generation.
Yeah, we are. We have to hold everyone else up. So do you remember there's a very famous New Yorker cartoon which features a dog sitting at a computer and typing. And the caption is, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. That cartoon came out in the late 90s. And the humor of that cartoon was that you could be anyone you like on the internet. No one used real names back then.
Which was a radical idea, wasn't it?
It was like the internet was this sort of like mysterious fantasy realm where you never used your full name. You would never post a photo of your face on there. The idea was that on the internet, you'd come up with some ridiculous email address, whatever at hotmail.com, fluffy unicorn at hotmail.com. You'd never use your name. And then we thought the internet was a fun place where you could experiment with different personas. But then what Gen Z came into was the internet was real life.
That was your persona.
And I wonder if even Gen Z users, do they say IRL? Because we used IRL to denote like, this is the internet, but this is real life.
The thing that's interesting about this is, so Planck's essay is very positive, right? It's very like, we saw this amazing progressive era. She's American, so she's talking about American politics. Under Obama, that's why we believe in politics and we believe in change and all these things. She's like, we got to party, we got to do all this stuff. And you are bringing what Gen X always called classic millennial energy, which is the tiny violin.
Yeah, the internet really struck me because like my eldest child, who's not quite millennial, he's technically Z, but he's almost 28. So he's sort of within the tail end of he didn't experience the toxicity of algorithms and social media. It was fun for him. And the internet was full of opportunities and the beginning of streaming and things were good before they became toxic.
Yeah, I can even talk about the fact that I was there on the night that Facebook started. I don't know if I've shared this on the pod before, but I was at Harvard when Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook. And I remember the night it started, my roommate walked into my room.
Were you in the social network? Were you a character? I don't know if we've spoken about this in enough depth.
This is Amelia Lester.
So I'm sitting in
What year was this?
2004.
Okay.
I'm sitting in my dorm room and my roommate comes in and she says, have you heard of this thing called the Facebook? And it started literally a couple of hours beforehand. So I signed up. So I was the 60th user and that used to be in my URL of my name.
Amelia 60.
Amelia 60, not 69.
At the Facebook.
60. Everyone was super excited because you could upload it. It was the first time that you could upload a photo of yourself and put your name. It felt safe because it was a little closed ecosystem. You'd never done that before. The idea of putting your name and your face on the internet was a new idea.
And what made it feel safe
because
and like a good idea?
Because it was just for Harvard students. So it was very restricted. And then it only became for other university students. And, it gradually got bigger and bigger, but it started as a closed ecosystem. So you joined that night. It had all these fields like political views. Everyone put very liberal regardless of their political views because that's what we did at the time. Favorite movie, favorite quote. People put Annie Hall as their favorite movie.
Which was kind of like what we did on MySpace, right?
It was a bit like MySpace, but MySpace had a stigma around it because I think it still felt a little bit alternative, whereas Facebook was just what you did. It became what you did. But even that night, I felt a twinge of anxiety when I joined. And then after a few days, I already started to feel that pit in my stomach that comes from social media, that comes from competing with other people on social media.
The first time.
That we all know so well.
Yes. And then I emailed Mark Zuckerberg because I wrote a column in the university newspaper and I emailed him and said, hi, Mark, I'm writing an article about the Facebook and I'm trying to find out how to leave the Facebook, but there's no way to leave it. And he wrote back immediately. He was really worried and anxious because keep in mind he was like 20 years old and didn't know what he was doing. He wrote back immediately. He was like, hi, Amelia, thanks for getting in touch. I'm so glad you're writing about it because no one had written about it before. And he said, I haven't yet written the code to unjoin. But I'm working on it. And I look back on that and I think it's such a metaphor for what ended up happening, because we're all living in the Facebook world now and none of us can unjoin because he never wrote the code. So I wrote this article which was...
he now runs the world, that guy.
Yeah, he does. And so I wrote this article which was the second ever published article. It was about Facebook. It was 10 days after it had started. And basically in the article I was like, I feel bad about Facebook because it only took 10 days. I mean...
You were an iconoclast.
Wow.
Well, it's just that social media makes everyone feel bad. It wasn't a profound thought. It was just that I felt this pit in my stomach 10 days in.
It's so, and ironically, the Facebook was about rating women. That's what it was about, rating women's faces.
So he was known to us. So when my roommate came in, I knew who Mark Zuckerberg was because a few months before that he had started Face Mash, which was where he took our official student ID photos and pitted both men and women's official photos against each other, and you had to vote for the hotter one. Oh, yeah. And I remember there was a ranking of the top 10 women on campus and the top 10 men.
Which is what social media at its heart basically really is, whether it's comparing faces or lifestyles. And
he hadn't met Priscilla Chan, his wife at that point. Was
she also at Harvard?
She was. Okay, he met her in the line for the bathroom at a fraternity party. But he hadn't met her when he started Face Mash. So it very much read as sort of a horny, like opportunistic,
almost
like 20-year-old coding.
In Liz Plank's story about this golden age and why millennials had it good, she says the faces, my God, the faces. The women of that era had faces, distinct ones, faces with character and quirks, noses that weren't mathematically whittled into aerodynamic ski slopes, lips that weren't pre-measured to a 1:1:6 golden ratio. Rihanna had her face, Keira Knightley had her jawline, Zooey Deschanel had her big awkward round eyes. Women weren't expected to morph into an optimized version of beauty. There was no single template being mass-produced in Beverly Hills and exported around the country. There was no singular terrifying Instagram face.
And you know why that was? It was because we very rarely saw ourselves in a photo, because at the time you had to go to the chemist to get photos produced. Yeah. And so when the Facebook started, you had to literally scan in a photo. You didn't have digital photos of yourself. Like, cast your mind back.
So beauty was more varied then. Now for Gen Z, it's completely homogenized, and there is literally an algorithm that tells us what kind of beauty performs the best.
I know.
It's Instagram face.
I want to ask this bit about celebrity because you know I'm obsessed with celebrity culture, right? One of the things that Liz writes that was great about pop culture at that time, which, let's face it, was not all great, but she said, we got to live through Solange and Jay-Z in the elevator as a mystery, not as a micro trend dissected in 1,000 TikToks by teenagers convinced they had sources.
Yes.
And that is so true, because it's like, she says, Lemonade told us what happened, not a series of breathless exposés written by 19-year-olds who think watching a grainy paparazzi clip qualifies them to unpack what really happened.
I love this.
There has been a shift, a real shift in how we view celebrity culture now as a mystery to solve.
That's true. And also the opinionification of everything, the hot take, which is ironic given that that's what we do on this show in many cases. But then you could consume a piece of content and form your own opinion about it before you read 8 million others. Like, my feed at the moment is overrun with podcasts and videos and social deconstructing all the mysteries in White Lotus and Severance and this clue and that clue that you missed and this Easter egg, whether it's, Taylor Swift or a TV show. And that can feel fun, but it can feel exhausting. And then it can also apply to news, like the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni story.
And QAnon. Arguably, Taylor Swift's, she was famous all through the 2000s, but she really hit the stratosphere when we developed this receipts culture, because people essentially were consuming her music as gossip and connecting the dots of her music in a way that was quite distinct from when Lemonade came out in 2016, sorry. It was a quite different way. You were listening to the music first and foremost.
Yes.
But now it's different.
And Taylor very much pioneered Easter egg culture from a mainstream point of view.
Yes.
Intentionally dropping and creating all of those Easter eggs.
One of the things that Liz Plank says in this, and obviously she's very specific media lens, and she made her name in like startup internet businesses like BuzzFeed.
Fun fact about Liz Plank, she also co-hosted a podcast with Justin Baldoni
That's
about
right.
feminism,
She did quite recently.
which she quit after the New York Times story.
And in this piece, she writes about the enthusiasm of that time, like throwing yourselves into these kind of startups, working like a mofo, like never, you know, she says, we didn't go home till late and we didn't want to. That's where we found our family.
Startup culture was fun back then.
Yeah, and she says that even though she says with hindsight, there was a fair amount of exploitation in a way, it meant that people could build these careers and it felt very exciting and new.
Yeah, we were institutionalists. I think we were the last institutionalists. So we entered the workforce wanting to climb the corporate ladder. The notion of work-life balance was not important to us. The word hustle was glorified. Leaning in. I watched The Devil Wears Prada recently. Great movie. Love Stanley Tucci and love Anne Hathaway, but it feels like a relic of another time. The whole notion that you should sacrifice yourself to work in order to get this delayed promise of getting ahead, that just feels so alien now. And I know that younger people in the workforce resent that idea that they should pour themselves into the work at the expense of everything else.
Now I think Anne Hathaway's character would be telling Anna Wintour's character that she has boundaries and work-life balance is important to her. And could she work from home?
Anne Hathaway would be the content creator now.
Yeah, that's true.
And the movie would be about her.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Well, that's apparently what the sequel's going to be.
I have a last one to drop about womanhood because I wonder if you feel as optimistic about millennial women as Liz did. She says, if you were a girl, you were the first generation of women who truly had choices, not just in theory but in practice. Unlike our mothers, we weren't expected to marry straight out of college. We could be messy, ambitious, chaotic and unapologetic in ways they never could. I kind of feel like Gen X could do that too. We weren't just given the option of independence, we were expected to take it. More women of all walks of life were delaying marriage, delaying motherhood, pursuing careers, moving to cities, building lives on their own terms. And for the first time, it wasn't tragic to be a woman in her 20s without a husband. It was aspirational. Do you reckon that was a real thing? She's not buying the millennials had it all.
It felt a little tragic. I'm not proud of saying that, but as a woman who was single for much of my 20s, I really felt like, frankly, a failure at 30 when I wasn't married.
Really? You weren't empowered by the girls era, the TV show.
No, because it's funny you should mention Girls. I mean, Lena Dunham, that show is all about, it's sort of like a retelling of Sex and the City for 20-somethings. But Lena Dunham had the same desire to find someone, fall in love, settle down as Carrie Bradshaw did.
10 years earlier.
Yeah.
You being at day one of the culture we all live in now at Harvard with Mark Zuckerberg, we need to unpack further at another time. But the link to the essay that we're talking about is going to be in the show notes. And we'd love to know if millennials feel like they had it great or like Amelia, that they did not.
We could have had it all.